What's up, guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Saman Habibi, your real estate agent for the Durham region. I have a very special guest with me, Cam Cassidy, the Don of Oshawa, one of the originals in the region of Oshawa. And we are here in the office, and today we're going to be doing something different where we had the pleasure of attending the City of Oshawa's developer and realtor meeting this past week, and we got their PowerPoint slides, and we're going to essentially go through and talk about Oshawa as a region, the economy, what's happening in terms of developments from a residential perspective, from a commercial perspective, and then we'll touch on some data points for residential real estate, and then we'll also talk about multifamily and some commercial stuff as well. So, yeah, shall we jump right into it? Well, maybe you give everyone an introduction of yourself. Introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah. If you don't know me, I'm Cam Cassidy. I guess I should look in the camera. I've been a realtor now for 7 years here in Durham region, focusing on investors, helping investors, and it's a pleasure to be on and loving what's happening in the city of Oshawa. And I think there's a lot of good growth, and we'll talk about some of those key points. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so if I think we can just jump right into it. You've been here, you've lived in Oshawa, you work in Oshawa, you've had a business in Oshawa. If I was to ask you what was the mentality of Oshawa, or what did people know Oshawa for, what would you say that answer was?
GM.
It was GM. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into the slide, and we have a fast facts slide here where we essentially look at the breakdown of the economy here in Oshawa. And surprising to see that manufacturing is not leading the race in the economy. It's led by healthcare, by the Lakeridge healthcare systems here in the Durham region, educational service by, and that has to do with Ontario Tech, Durham College and Trent, retail trade, and then manufacturing. So, Cam, looking at this, does anything stand out to you in terms of those top three, and then GM being, in fourth place? What stands out to you when you look at this chart?
Yeah, just exactly that, right? I mean, everyone looks at Oshawa and they think GM,
Mm-hmm.
but, manufacturing is only 6% of the workforce in Oshawa, which, should be, surprising to some people that maybe aren't from Oshawa.
Yeah.
If you're from here, you're going, that's, that makes sense. I've always known that we've got a lot more going on with educational services like Ontario Tech and Durham College,
Mm-hmm.
with Lakeridge Health, being, a major hospital here, major research center. It's good to see they're very similar numbers to last year.
Yeah.
It's just showing that Oshawa is a more diverse economy. We're not a one-trick pony like we were back in the 70s when we had, this manufacturing would have been 60-70% of Oshawa's workforce.
Yeah. And I think this is important for investors as well, because when you look at this, when you look at these sectors, right, this is where some tenants come from, surprisingly, right? So I know you've had tenants in the healthcare space.
Yeah.
Maybe you can touch on that briefly, just to give people a sense of what kind of tenants they can expect. Are there professional tenants here?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, people always ask that question. Hey, what are my tenants going to look like? What are they going to be doing? And this is exactly giving you a breakdown of where you're going to find them, right? So, in the healthcare sector, I know one of my new tenants is a nurse. And again, she's a phenomenal tenant and, good paying job and,
Mm-hmm.
and, awesome tenant, right? Happy to have her. And, so, educational services too. I'm, trying to think back to all my tenants, but I don't know all their jobs and stuff, but even retail trade and stuff. One of them's an elevator mechanic actually. So,
right.
There is a lot of diversity as far as the tenant profile. Not to mention we're still close to Toronto, right? So you still could get the commuters and things like that. But
I think the other exciting thing is that all these sectors seem to be growing. So from healthcare, I know that it's not in Oshawa, but it's in Whitby. They're going to be building a new hospital in Whitby as well. From an educational perspective, I know Ontech, Durham College, and Trent, they're growing their footprint in terms
Mm-hmm.
of where they are and how many students they have. Retail trade seems to be growing. Manufacturing is still growing. And I would say, I don't know if industrial is an economy, but there's a lot of construction going on here. So
we're going to talk about the Northwood business park too, right?
Yeah.
Coming up. So
So the last thing I'll point out on this slide is the population growth, 15 plus, right? So it's been a steady growth since 2018. The news that we know about population growth in the Durham region is that it's going to double by 20 2030 or 2050. I can't remember, but it's heading to that direction of growth. And then last thing I'll point out is unemployment rate. So we've seen a 3% drop since 2021, and then almost a 5% drop since peak of COVID, right, in 2020.
Yeah, I think 2020 and 2021's numbers would be a little skewed because of COVID, but we're still even lower than 2018.
Yeah, right? Lower than historicals, yeah.
So it's good to see that employment is down, population is up, the labor force is growing,
So, moving on, if people are still, curious about GM and what GM is doing, on the next slide that we're going to look at, it kind of breaks down what's happening with GM right now. So recently there was a $1.3 billion investment from GM in the city of Oshawa, and essentially to invest some money into their assembly plant. So that brings 2,600 workers, full-time workers, which is good because, you're creating new jobs, but also maintaining some jobs. Their CTC, the Canadian Technical Center, where they do a lot of the coding and a lot of the development of the technology, is in Oshawa, and I believe that's where they're doing a lot of work for the EV vehicle technology. And there's also that test track, the $170 million test track, where it's at one of their existing plants, and they're going to be essentially testing electronic vehicles and parts that they're providing to different manufacturers. So, I think to me, this says that they're still proactive. They're still using the space. That
was the big, in 2018, I think it was when GM announced they were leaving. That was the big, everyone was worried that, Oshawa was going to fall apart. The Durham region relied on GM, and we all said, no, look at how small the sector of manufacturing is. And it hasn't changed, but at the same time, it's nice to see they came back, right? It's nice to see they came back. They opened the truck plant up again and invested into it, as you just pointed out. And you still have the engineering side of things here and the test track, which, gives some diversity to it, right? And even GM is not just putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. And it's great to see.
And I think GM's one of those companies where they've said that they're going to go electronic vehicles in the foreseeable future. And I think it's 2030 or 2035. So it's good that the expansion is geared towards the new style of vehicles, right? Awesome. Why don't we talk about the GO Train expansion? So this is something that we've, it's been in the talks and it's been reported on a lot. We're on slide 9, and it's the GO Train East expansion. Do you want to touch on this a little bit? What's the background with this? Where is it going to be? How is this beneficial to the rest of the Durham region?
Yeah, no, it's, the economic value that they estimate is $1.1 billion of this GO Train expansion. So it is massive news for Oshawa and the Durham region.
Yeah.
You got the 4 new GO Train stations coming. So the one in Thornton, on Thornton Corner there, the one in Ritson, you have one in Curtis and one in Bowmanville. So it's awesome to see. I think it's going to create, as it shows here, 21,000 permanent jobs just because of those that extension. So it's phenomenal. The city's been this has been talked about for years. They're finally going ahead. There was that scare. I think it was a couple of years ago where they were reevaluating the actual where the stations were going to go. That's right. Yeah. That's already done and passed. So
this is good news for people living east of Oshawa, because right now, if you're in Bowmanville, Curtis, you're driving to Oshawa and then you're hopping on the GO Train from Oshawa. But it's nice that it's going to happen. And here we have a map where the solid green line essentially shows the existing, and then the dotted green line shows the new stop. So if anyone wants to know specifically where these locations are, you can reach out to me, or you can drop a question in the question section below, and we can point out exactly what intersections these stops are going to be at. Okay, let's move along. We'll go to slide 11. So why don't we kind of jump and talk about new development from a commercial perspective. So we know that there is the Northwood Business Park development. I've spoke about this on a couple other presentations where this is an intersection at Taunton and Thornton, if I'm correct. And in terms of gross area, it's 722 acres of land. And out of that, 500 acres of it is going to be developed. And the development is going to be industrial, open space, and recreational. special purpose commercial. Here we can see, and this has already been approved and it's ready to go. So, this is going to attract a lot of business. We're looking at a map over here, and essentially the Northwood Business Park would be within the red line and within that border. We see that it's very closely situated to the Oshawa Airport, the 3 universities. Highway 47 is just north of there, 401 is just south of there. Why don't we talk about this a little bit? We know that there's some development happening here in terms of some big players in the tech space. We know Amazon's here. Do you have any insight on how much land in this area is selling for approximately per acre? Do you have that data? I know you had a client who had a property in this area.
Yeah. So I do know a client who is selling a property here, and they're on average getting $1 million an acre.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Well, and this is why right now that there's big demand there, and the biggest one is the Amazon warehouse that's already built there. And I drive past it now when I'm going home, and it's pretty crazy to see that Amazon has made a big investment into their region, into Oshawa. And, that's been the big talk in all commercial real estate is how, retail's getting crushed, office is getting crushed, and the focus is on industrial. So, I mean, what better news for Oshawa than having an industrial park being built, being developed, attracting people there to one of the hottest sectors of real estate right now.
Yeah. And it's nice. Yeah, I think you mentioned it. It's industrial, and, with industrial, there comes a lot of employment with it as well. So, this is going to inject a lot of jobs into the area. It's going to develop the area. Some of this green space is going to turn into revenue driving, and it's good for the city from a development charge perspective. So maybe that will help with property taxes, hopefully, but we'll see.
We won't hold our breath.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next thing we wanted to talk about was we kind of wanted to talk about the university and the wind tunnel they have there. And, the wind tunnel is one of the things they have, but essentially we want to talk about talent and what kind of talent that the university generates. It's a big university in the Durham region. It's one of the bigger ones in the East End, of course. We have us, and then you go further east, you have Kingston. But it's a university that offers some unique programs from, whether it be nuclear engineering, and there aren't many of those in Canada. I believe there's 2 or 3 universities, but in Ontario Tech being one of them. And with that being a newer university that offers different programs, you get a lot of investments. And one of the investments has been this ACE wind tunnel, which is essentially a chamber that can create different scenarios in terms of environment. So you can create a very cold environment to test vehicles, or you can change it within 20 minutes to a very hot environment to test that same vehicle to see how it performs. And essentially, it allows the university to groom these students who are going to go into the labor force. And the goal here is that as all this development happens in the Durham region with the Northwood Business Park and all the investments coming here, is that some of this labor can be pushed into local areas, right? So I know currently you have these students going and working at OPG. So, it's nice to see that there's more development coming in, and they're going to be able to kind of slot into the Durham region, and the talent stays here and doesn't really leave the area.
Yeah, and I bet you this is one of the major reasons why GM came back, right? And are investing into, the test track and things like that. And I know the ACE Wind Tunnel, just did a big investment where they now created not just the tunnel, but they created essentially a giant treadmill for cars. So they can put the cars on it and they can actually run it. So I think it's going to attract other car companies too. Yeah. I know Toyota's got a presence in Clarington as well. So I mean, that's right, they're going to attract other car companies wanting to utilize this, not only utilize the labor force, but utilize the technology that these universities are creating, which is so cool for Oshawa.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else worth pointing out before we jump into some residential data?
No, I think just to kind of summarize, it's interesting that, we're touching on, GM being, people's view of Oshawa. And now we're talking about this massive Northwood Business Park, which was a big highlight of the meeting. We're talking about the university, which has always been growing and expanding. And it's neat because it's all 3 of them. You can see how they can work together to really create, lots of diversity in Oshawa.
No, that's awesome. Awesome. Next, we're going to jump and talk about residential real estate and how the Durham region and Oshawa in specific is performing. I'll essentially throw it to you and say, obviously, we know that the comments regarding the market has been kind of, there's a lot of news about it in terms of we hit the peak and now we're kind of on the down. But what are you noticing in the Durham region in specific, since our audience is for the Durham region? What are you noticing to what's happened to prices? What's happened to inventory? What's your observation?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, everybody knows about the interest rate hikes, right? Everyone has talked a lot about it. They understand now that we are down 30% from February highs. So that's no secret that is out there. But what I think the biggest secret is, or what I think the major point of focus that I'm looking at, is the fact that our average price has been stable for the past 5 months since July.
Yeah.
We have not seen the values continuing to go down. We've seen them stabilized, right? Yeah. And a bigger surprise, and the reason for that is because we haven't seen inventory get higher. Durham region is still one of the lowest amount of inventory in all of Ontario. We're below 2 months of inventory still in a crashing market, so to speak, right? And I want to be careful pretending to be bullish or acting bullish, but it's surprising. Interest rates have gone up and continue to go up, yet we're still seeing a lack of inventory, and we're still seeing prices be at a stable number. So, we'll see if that changes. But to me, that's what I'm keeping an eye on. Yeah,
and we have a chart here that our audience can see, and it's essentially looking at the different regions in the Durham region. We have Ajax, Clarington, Oshawa, Pickering, Uxbridge, Whitby, and you can kind of see my cursor is pointed to the month of June. And it's essentially a flat line going forward. You have a bit of slight ups, slight dips, but when you look at it on an average, to your point, it's been fairly stable. And there's actually some regions where they've kind of peaked a little bit month over month because of the shortage of inventory, right? If I'm looking at December, I'm seeing that Pickering, Oshawa, Whitby, and Ajax are slightly up month over month, and it goes back to the inventory. So why do you think the inventory is so low right now?
Yeah, that's a good question and a tougher one, because I think people are stuck. I think people are either if they've purchased, their equity has vanished. 30% of it is gone. Yeah, they're locked into a solid interest rate. They don't want to move. There's fear in the market. They're saying why would I want to move? People have almost frozen, right? So sales are down, 49% year over year for back-to-back months in both October and November. So, I mean, there's little buyers out there, but there's also little sellers, or a few sellers, which, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the one thing I've noticed is the increase in supply for rental data, which kind of, points to the fact why we have low inventories, because there's a lot of properties that are up for lease right now. So, people are saying, well, hey, if prices are not what they used to be, well, I'll just continue renting it, or I'll put my property for rent so I can at least try and recoup some of this interest expense. And then when the market turns, whenever that is, maybe then I'll test the market. But, you're playing with fire, right? Because I don't know if anyone really knows when the market's going to turn. I've noticed, I think the recent number that I looked at was an increase of 133% to supply when it comes to the rental market. So there's a lot of properties out there for rent.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Yeah. People are still hanging on, and they're thinking, hey, this is only going to be a short term. Yeah. I'm not sure about that. I don't like to make market predictions, but I could see us being flat like this for all of 2023. Yeah. And it would be a matter of if people can hang on, if they can keep their jobs, if they can ride through this kind of, economic slowdown or recession, whatever you want to call it. But it is interesting to me.
The other point maybe you can talk about is the flooding of supply into the rental market when we look at kind of some of these high-rise apartment buildings going up. So we have 80 Bond, and there's also the UC Towers in North Oshawa. So do you want to maybe talk about what happens when these developments come to a finish, like in terms of supply? What's going on at 80 Bond and UC Tower?
Yeah, I mean, well, 80 Bond is all rental units, right? So
how many units?
It's like 300 and something,
so,
right? I don't know, it's 300 and something units coming to the market. I know they're trying to layer those on.
Yeah.
Because even for themselves, they don't want to hurt themselves by adding too much supply to the market. But it is still a ton of rental inventory coming to the market. And at the same time, you mentioned UC Tower, which is just completed in North Oshawa. And we're seeing supply of listings coming on of speculators that are trying to, either flip or turn these over, but also rental listings there as well. So, I mean, there is a lot, whether it's people that, can't sell their home. And like you mentioned, are trying to find a way to hang on to it through renting it, or 80 bonds, or the UC Towers. So that makes sense, the number of 133%.
Yeah. And I think that number that I looked at didn't even include the new, I was just looking at freehold inventory coming to market. So,
well, again, there's a lot of, off-market stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oshawa's known to use, use Marketplace and Kijiji and things like that, where you don't always get a clear picture.
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. I think we talked about that. Should we jump and talk about multifamily a little bit and look at some data? So we'll go to slide 62. So we wanted to kind of give people a view of what some numbers look like when it comes to multifamily investment properties. I know that here in Oshawa, I forget what the year was like, but I think it was 70s and 80s. There was a bit of a boom in these apartment buildings being built, and the ownership happened then, and not a lot of it comes to market. So when it does come to market, it comes at a premium. So we'll look at one over here, and we'll just quickly talk about prices. So the one I'm looking at is 563 Oxford Street. So that's in Oshawa in the Lakeview neighborhood. This sale happened January 3rd, 2022. The sale price was $4.5 million. And the number of units was 20 units. We don't have the split of what the room situation was, but 20 units for $4.5 million. That sold for $225,000 a unit. Any comments there on this property?
Yeah, I mean, the timing is always important, right? The transaction date of it being June, as we just talked about, that was kind of when, the bottom, so to speak, of that crash happened. So it does give you a sense of where we are at. I would say that's a pretty accurate number of 225 a unit. You think about legal 2 units in Oshawa, they're going for about 400 a unit right now, right? So they're roughly around 800,000. So that makes sense for, this type of building to be at a discount than, let's say, a legal 2 unit. It makes sense.
Another one we can look at is 639 Cuthbert Street. So again, in Oshawa, this one sold August 4th, 2022. So roughly around the same time. Number of units, smaller building, 6 units. So when you break it down, this one is 269,000 a unit. So it looks like the average price is around 255-ish to 260, 65-ish, somewhere around that point.
Yeah, this makes sense. Like the 20 unit building going for cheaper. So typically, that number will change as you go to a legal 2 unit at 400, right? So, you can see that if you went to a 6-plex, if you went to a triplex, you'd probably get up to 300 a unit. You get to a duplex, which is a little bit nicer product. You get up to that, 350, 400 a unit, right? So,
What are your thoughts on the investment type? Like, looking at a multifamily versus a duplex. Which one is easier to manage? Which one's easier to turn over? Which one's easier to sell? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the multifamily, the strategy behind the multifamily investing is you have one, right? It's easier to, it's cheaper for your overall maintenance, your deferred maintenance. The problem with the multifamily investing right now is just the cap rate spread between the buyers and the seller. The sellers are looking for 4 or 4.5% cap rates when interest rates are now 5.5%. So buyers need a 6.5% cap rate, and sellers don't really want to sell at that price. So there's this disconnect with the buyers and sellers. as well as a legal 2 unit, right? The financing and the tightening of credit has become a major problem. And I think that's why we're seeing such a slowdown in transaction, slowdown in sales. And, things like legal 2 units are, as you know, easier to move, right? Easier to sell. There's more uses for them, right? You can have families moving into it. You can have multi-generational families. You can have house hacking situations going on, where multifamily is just pure investors, right?
Yeah, I wonder what the play is with these multifamily units, because when you look at the transaction history, like a lot of these buildings have been owned for a very long time. Purchase prices are low. You can tell that the rents are low as well. So, for that original owner, it's probably working well. They're cash flowing. But for the guy that's buying this for $1.8 million, we don't have pictures of what it looks like, but I would assume that there's some deferred maintenance here.
Well,
so you're big cash injection to purchase, and then there's CapEx involved. So I don't know what the strategy is here.
Yeah, it's like a lot of them, right? They're banking on rents going up. They're banking on turning over these tenants and increasing their rents, right? And that's the one thing about these buildings we don't know is how many units were vacant, what were the rents like. Because as we know, in residential, it can be tough to turn tenants over with the Residential Tenancy Act in Ontario here.
Just a question. So this is it says commercial sale. Do these fall under the LTB in terms of rent increase and tenant management?
Oh, yeah. Even though it's commercially financed, anything over 4 units, but any sort of, it would also fall under the Residential Tenancy Act. They're all built prior to November 18th, November 15th, 2018. So they would, fall under rent control, meaning very tough. A lot of the landlords are just trying to do cash for keys and turn them over to try to increase the rent, which would increase the values. But
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. We tried our best to give you an update in terms of what's going on in Oshawa, in terms of the economy, in terms of development, in terms of residential and commercial, and we also talked about multifamily. If you have any questions about any of the topics we talked about, please drop them below. And if you would actually like a copy of this presentation, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can forward this along to you just so you have it and you can take a look at it on your own. You can connect with me via my links below, and my calendar link is also below if you'd like to book a call with me, a one-on-one call with me, and we can talk about your personal scenario. And otherwise, Cameron, if people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, at Cam Cassidy. Reach out to me and happy to connect.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for watching. Again, if you have any questions, drop them in the comment section below.